One down, and with 49 states to go, get set for more surprises in the race to the White House. As the candidates graduate to New Hampshire ahead of next Tuesday's first primary, there's all to play for. Monday night saw on the Democratic side the tightest Iowa caucus ever. Hillary Clinton edging left-wing Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders by 0.2%, failing, though, to deliver that early knockout blow that would have enabled the former Secretary of State and First Lady to cruise to the nomination. The Republicans boasting their highest ever turnout in Iowa, with evangelical hard-right Texas Senator Ted Cruz distancing Donald Trump. How will more mainstream candidates react next Tuesday in New Hampshire? Does that high turnout debunk claims that voters no longer have faith in the system? This in a nation where growth and jobs have failed to reduce inequality or soften the rhetoric of an increasingly polarized political system. It's once again a chance for our panel to reflect on, well, what a funny way Americans have of picking their president, with a rural Midwestern state and a rural New England state hogging the limelight at this crucial early stage. What result will it all bring in 2016? Today in the François debate, next stop New Hampshire. With us from Washington, two Republican strategists. Dan Hazelwood, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
And we want to thank Patrick Ruffini for joining us as well. He is also in Washington. From Tallahassee in Florida, Steve Shale, who ran the Obama campaign for the state of Florida in 2008. Welcome to the France 24 debate.
Hey, thanks again.
Want me to do anything?
A Bernie Sanders supporter, Zachary Miller, is with us. He is the producer of the upcoming documentary, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. Many thanks for being with us. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. Yes, it is indeed on to New Hampshire. First, though, Iowa, the state that put Jimmy Carter and Barack Obama on the map, has once again, on the Republican side, opted for a hard-right candidate.
Tonight is a victory for the grassroots. Tonight, the state of Iowa has spoken. Iowa has sent notice that the Republican nominee and the next president of the United States will not be chosen by the media.
Ted Cruz pointing to the fact that Iowa doesn't always pick the nominee. Let's go to Des Moines. And France 24 correspondent Philip Crowther. Was that Ted Cruz's 15 minutes of fame?
Not necessarily, because this is a man who's pretty well known, first of all, in Washington, where two of your guests are right now. Of course, Ted Cruz, known by many as the most hated man in Washington, not an unknown quantity, and he could go on to do some other successful things in the next few primary states. In New Hampshire, though, he's trailing in the polls by a pretty big margin behind Donald Trump. Donald Trump, of course, coming out as, well, more or less a loser in these Iowa caucuses. For Ted Cruz, this is the moment also of fame that he had to have to be able to move forward in this long election campaign in the United States, because Iowa was made for Ted Cruz. He is a hardline right winger, if you want, from an European perspective at least, and the evangelical right here, the evangelical Christian vote, had to be on Ted Cruz's side, and it was in the end. That was a crucial electorate that he got in the end here in the Iowa caucuses of 2016, and that was also on the side of Rick Santorum, who won 4 years ago on the Republican side, and on the side of Mike Huckabee 8 years ago. But remember, those two, their presidential campaigns didn't exactly go according to plan, and they didn't get anywhere near the White House. Hence why Ted Cruz, well, he might not make it that far either, of course. And the GOP establishment, the Republican Party establishment, certainly does not want to see Ted Cruz as the Republican nominee.
Philip, before I get the panel's reaction on Ted Cruz, describe for us, please, what checkout time is like in Iowa.
Checkout time has been and gone because the candidates who were here campaigning to the very last moment, and all of them had organized their very own victory parties. These weren't just caucus watch parties that everybody organized. They were victory parties. Even if you don't win, you have to organize a victory part at the end of voting to make things look as good as possible. Look at Marco Rubio, for example, who basically gave a victory speech despite coming in third place. All the candidates left as quickly as possible, and indeed some of them already arrived in New Hampshire in the early morning local time. One of them is Bernie Sanders, who, fresh off this success, in his view at least, here in the Iowa caucuses, arrived in New Hampshire at 5 a.m. in the morning, and there was a crowd waiting for him at a local airport, and he gave a little speech there. That shows some of the momentum that Bernie Sanders has at this point. All the presidential candidates, François, have left Iowa. They are going on to bigger and better things. The New Hampshire primary is next.
All right, Philip Crowther, many thanks. We'll be hearing, by the way, from Bernie Sanders at that pre-dawn rally a little bit later on. Let me first get some reactions from the panel regarding Ted Cruz. I'll start with you, Dan Hazel. Would you agree with Philip Crowther that when it comes to on the Republican side, that Cruz is the most hated man in Washington? What is this?
I'm not sure that he's necessarily the most hated man, but he has not won friends amongst the political elite in Washington, D.C. He prides himself on that. He likes to draw a contrast. Ted Cruz has gone out to set sort of a different model than other candidates. And it's a smart model, and it may be the path to the nomination to the White House. He is trying to rebuild a conservative movement of people who are conservative activists who want to really fundamentally change the direction of government. He harkens back to Reagan as an example, but there's a lot of examples of people building a movement like this, and he is intentionally going forward to do that, and he's doing that partially by irritating the political elite in Washington. He has been very successful at irritating the political elite at Washington, but the political elite in Washington are very unpopular in the country and in the grassroots, I think, of both parties, but particularly the Republican Party. So it's a smart strategy.
But how seriously do voters really take a guy who says he wants to dissolve the Internal Revenue Service?
Well, Republicans take that pretty seriously. There's the Internal Revenue Service, and that phraseology helps symbolize the frustration that Americans have with government, a bureaucracy that cares about themselves, a bureaucracy that cares about special interests. You know, that's what Ted Cruz is appealing to in the strongest language possible. That's also part of what Donald Trump and Marco Rubio are appealing to, and frankly, Bernie Sanders in a totally different fashion. But the people in America are incredibly frustrated by a government that has grown more distant and seems to be uncaring about people in everyday lives, and seems to cater to the government's interests and to the desires of special interests. So that language appeals not only to conservative Republicans, but frankly to large swaths of America. How you translate that into policy is something we'll get to down the road.
Steve Shale, do you take Ted Cruz seriously?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a large part of his win last night was he put together the best campaign. I mean, he went out and figured out his path to victory and stuck to it in a very meaningful way. And I think, you know, as Dan indicated, I think the country is so frustrated right now with politics as usual that I don't think my side can take anybody on their side for granted. So, you know, we'll go forward. New Hampshire is obviously a very different animal than Iowa. Then we go to South Carolina, which is probably culturally more aligned with the Iowa electorate, and you know we'll see where we go from there. But I think Iowa did its job of narrowing the field, and you know we'll see if New Hampshire adds anybody to the mix. But right now, I think we probably go to Iowa with a three-man race. I mean, South Carolina with a three-man race.
All right, and one of those men is, of course, Donald Trump, who may be from Queens, but some in his hometown seem to be gloating over his Monday setback in Iowa. The New York Daily News's front page, dead clown walking while piling on the paint on the inside pages, poking great fun at Trump. You lose, and it was huge, sort of imitating the voice there of the candidate. Does he suddenly, Patrick Ruffini, seem vulnerable, Donald Trump?
Well, this was certainly a surprise. Going into the caucuses, he led in virtually every Iowa poll by, in some cases, 7 points, in some cases, 3 or 4 points. And this is something that a number of people had suspected was going to happen. The fact is, in Iowa, it's a very different electorate. You have people who need to show up for a couple hours in the cold on a Monday night, and they have to stay there. It's not like you go into a voting booth and you come out of the voting booth and you can go into the voting booth at any time during the day. It's a very different electorate. The electorate expanded, and surprisingly, people thought, well, that's going to be good for Donald Trump. It turned out not to be that good for Donald Trump. It's possible that Republicans actually came out against Donald Trump in record numbers after seeing, I think, kind of the circus that had become sort of the Republican primary process up to this point. And I think Iowa has clarified that process, setting up, what I think is a three-man race between Donald Trump perhaps continuing, perhaps being able to do better in New Hampshire, Marco Rubio representing the more establishment center-right lane of the party, and Ted Cruz on the conservative side.
Trump taking it all in stride, and for that he can point to polls that show him ahead nationally, as well in New Hampshire. And Patrick Ruffini, when I look at those poll numbers, and we're getting them up here, you see the New Hampshire poll, 3 times more support nearly than Ted Cruz. Is he a shoo-in to win in New Hampshire, Donald Trump?
I would not say that. I would not say so because historically, what has happened, we get the Iowa results, and then all of a sudden, New Hampshire responds to the Iowa results. And I think this has not happened necessarily in previous years. I don't think that the Iowa caucuses have been as significant in 2008 and 2012 as they were this year, but I do think this was a very significant result, and I think people in New Hampshire and in other states are going to be looking at this and processing this. Let's also remember there are 4 or 5 candidates sitting right at that 10% level. You have Jeb Bush, you have Chris Christie, you have John Kasich, who all represent this sort of more mainstream center-right alternative. And the question is, does that consolidate into fewer candidates? You have the governor of Ohio, John Kasich, doing pretty well in New Hampshire, representing probably the most centrist approach within the party. So the question is, if New Hampshire consolidates support for a single 1 or 2 or 3 candidates in the same way as Iowa did very quickly in the last week, I think we could see a very close race in New Hampshire.
And who's going to be the mainstream candidate?
I think Marco Rubio has a very good shot at being the mainstream candidate. I do think John Kasich, though, has been putting an interesting campaign together, getting a lot of newspaper endorsements in New Hampshire. But I do think that New Hampshire will respond to this election result that has surprised a lot of people in Iowa.
All right, Trump, of course, taking it all in stride. He has said that he was happy to finish second. He's tweeted as much this Tuesday. With the primary a week away, the Donald's momentary show of modesty was brief on Monday night.
I will say this. I don't know who's going to win between Bernie and Hillary. I don't know what's going to happen with Hillary. She's got other problems, maybe bigger than the problems she's got in terms of nominations. But we've had so many different indications and polls that we beat her, and we beat her easily. And we will go on to get the Republican nomination, and we will go on to easily beat Hillary or Bernie or whoever the hell they throw up there.
Zachary Miller, what's your reaction when you look at the Republican field?
Well, it's very interesting. It's like probably the most exciting political field we've had as far as just pure entertainment value. I think the establishment Republicans are going to be looking at who they can back, because there are too many. There are 17 individuals, and none of the establishment Republicans want Trump or Cruz. So they had to figure out who that might be, and I actually agree that they'll probably kind of consolidate around Rubio. I think a Rubio-Kasich ticket would be the ticket that the traditional Republicans would like and would probably be a good ticket for them.
Dan Hazelwood, is that how it's going to play out in the end?
Well, I'm not sure how it's going to play out in the end, but in the short term, I think we're exactly right. In New Hampshire, all polling that occurred before last night is now mostly irrelevant because the playing field is turned upside down. There's really only going to be one moderate candidate coming out of New Hampshire. It's either going to be Kasich, Christie, or Jeb Bush. Whichever one of those three does the best will survive. The other two will be functionally eliminated from this campaign. Even with Jeb Bush's money, he'll disappear if he doesn't perform the best of that group. And Rubio, if he starts to rise in New Hampshire, he will become, as everybody said, one of the key people that people will coalesce around. Cruz will gain a little bit of strength. And if Donald Trump doesn't take a first place in New Hampshire, he is eliminated. Because of his failing in Iowa, and that absolutely was a failure for Donald Trump, if Donald Trump does not take a first in New Hampshire, his support will collapse because a person who brags as being a winner, who loses twice in a row, does not get a third chance. So we've got a lot of interesting things going on here, but we're going to see, how well does Rubio do and how does he do compared to Cruz and Kasich? That's one group, and then does the air come out of Trump that quickly? I'm not sure it will, but that's what to watch for in New Hampshire. And if the direction that's all headed is, as someone else alluded to, as we head on to South Carolina with three candidates of Trump, of Cruz, of Rubio, and then maybe Trump or somebody else in his stead. Probably Trump, though, will be the third.
All right, we're going to get more reactions and look at what's going on the Democratic side after that wafer-thin victory by Hillary Clinton Monday night. When we come back, you're watching the France 24 debate.